Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we're joined by an extremely talented and intelligent man from Dallas, Texas, who not only is sticking it to the establishment and speaking truth to word as an anarcho-capitalist, but he's the vocalist for the band BackWordz, a band quickly becoming a favorite among AnCaps and Libertarians and freedom lovers in general. His name is Eric July, and if you haven't heard of him yet, well, you will now. Welcome to WHAM, Mr. July.
Man, thanks for having me, brother man.
Awesome. Well, okay, so first of all, Eric, your music is truly profound. It's interesting to see so much meaning in one song. The lyrics are poetic, and you rip apart the establishment with each line. What inspires you when you write?
Oh man, that's a great question. Actually, I mean, I would just say experience in general is what inspires me and really keeps me going. I feel like I tell a story all the time about me growing up as a hardcore leftist. You know, I was a hardcore leftist growing up, and I really just with me turning kind of on my views and really starting to become more knowledgeable on things such as economics probably being the biggest thing, becoming more knowledgeable on that, and just liberty in general. And unfortunately, people my age, on the younger side, tend to lean heavily to the left, heavily for a pro-government expansion of government and things of that nature. So seeing that, and also seeing that in music in general, there's really not a whole lot of liberty-minded folks, and if they are, they're very subtle. They're not really open about it. So I almost feel a sense of like, all right, I got to put it on my back and really represent, you know. So again, just seeing all of that, and along with my experience, just really keeps me going. And because there's so many things going on in the world nowadays, it's always inspiring me to write new things and keep things fresh.
Well, and I have to say it was really refreshing to find you. I mean, it's incredible music, and at the same time, it's got such a great level of information within the music. And you know, it's something that you don't see so much of anymore, or in general, actually. And it's nice to see someone who is coming out as more of an anarcho-capitalist and is shutting down the stereotypes around anarcho-capitalism, where it's like, oh, you dirty capitalist, or stuff like that, or even the more leftist approach at anarchy, which is actually just more collectivism. And I wanted to say, like, as an anarcho-capitalist, it's not that I don't believe in government existing, it's that I want the ability to opt out and voluntarily decide my fate. Collectivism is building in the West, all while the message of freedom is growing at the same time. Now, you once campaigned for President Obama, but today you consider yourself an AnCap or Libertarian. What bridged that gap for you and brought you to become an individualist, and how do you define anarcho-capitalism?
Well, as far as my story, as I mentioned, I was a hardcore leftist, and I was, out there promoting Obama out there at the University of Memphis, big time, and really just becoming more knowledgeable on other kind of ideologies and other alignments. So it got me thinking about things such as economics. And the big guy that I always point to is Thomas Sowell. And reading up on him, reading his basic economics book, and just reading more up on him, and he kind of led me to Walter Williams. I was wanting to read about more like black economists still. I was still stuck in my box. So thankfully, those were the first guys that I kind of picked up. And, reading about Walter Williams, and he's more of a, libertarian, and he'd been talking about this stuff for 30 years. And I was like, yeah, libertarianism. And he is one of those minarchists that he believes and he knows, and that's why I appreciate him, because he acknowledges, at least as a minarchist, acknowledges the fact that government, even at its existence and at its best, is still an immoral act, or a coercive act, coercive entity. And I just really kind of got led to this just by thinking critically and becoming more knowledgeable. And I was like, well, why does the government itself need to exist when we go through so many voluntary exchanges? This was long before I'd ever even picked up a Murray Rothbard book, and before I had already was ready to abolish the government. And when I think about anarcho-capitalists, I think of I like the way you put it. That's an interesting take on it, in which you say that you think of it as being able to opt out of the state, and I really think that's a great way to put it, because that's the way Ron Paul put it. He would say, what's wrong with having people be able to opt out of government? You have actually now, people that are able to do it in a slight sense. Why can't that be applied, to everybody? So I agree with that in that sense, and people just should be able to opt out. And if you do want to have your government, or if that's what you want to call it, at least have a voluntary one. And that's really why I think the AnCap umbrella amongst all schools of, I guess, thought, anarchy thought, it reigns kind of supreme, because it allows, if you want to be an ANCOM, you can go have your, commune over there, it still exists voluntarily under our umbrella. So that's what I feel like AnCap is. It's really kind of I guess the private ownership of goods and services, but the voluntary exchange of those private goods and services, and in that you are able to have pretty much whatever school of anarchy you want, whatever kind of society you want, you're able to have that exist, so as long as individuals are able to opt out of it.
Absolutely, and you explained it so well, and I always go back to something that really kind of woke me up to this whole thing was that, with voluntarism, like you mentioned, you can have your society over here that's communist. You can have your society over here that's maybe even neoconservatism and, socialism over there. And it's a point of being able to opt out. And at the same time, like, we can't force people into an anarchist society, because that would be going against, all forms of anarchy. So I think it's a really interesting idea to be able to have your choice in this. And I think it's the most inviting form of political affiliation or lack thereof, to be able to allow people to make their own choices in their life. And in the end, who consents to being forced into this kind of paradigm that we are currently in? Now, central banks and big government monopolization seem to rule the day. We have enough problems with a giant federal government, but a lot of the collectivists in office want to even further the tyranny to a world government system. We are enslaved by debt as money is printed out of thin air, prices inflate, and we are taxed to death while paying off the interest on the debt, created by the very creation of the currency. So this too is more of a global issue than anything. What are your thoughts on the push for absolute globalist control over the government, monetary system, and the individual?
Oh man, that's dangerous. I mean, that's the one thing that I feel like kind of gets swept under the rug. But in the same sense, I don't want to say appreciate. I guess that's kind of the wrong word to put it. But the fact that we live in America, and the fact that our currency, I believe it's up to like the dollar, the U.S. dollar is like, I believe like 50%, almost 50% at least. It's like 40 or 50% of all the global exchanges are they happen with pretty much the U.S. dollar. So it puts us in a cool kind of situation in which, if we were to alter our currency, whether it be like, guys like us, we want to abolish like the Federal Reserve, and we want to start having kind of market-based currency, and which will more than likely probably end up with precious currency backed by some type of precious metal, or being able to convert back into those precious metals, such as silver, such as gold, things of that nature. We're in a cool kind of position because, our currency is used so much. So almost like everywhere else in the world kind of has to make their kind of adjustments. If we go and abolish our Federal Reserve System, and we start having money backed by something that, is real and not being printed out of thin air, and not putting off all of this debt on the unborn and whatnot. So again, it puts us in a nifty situation, a kind of cool situation that we are, at least in America, which is why I feel like we need to be so loud and need to be so proud about trying to go abolish the Federal Reserve System, and highlighting monetary policy and things of that nature. Because, I mean, you talk to a lot of people who, before I even discovered libertarianism, that was foreign to me. Federal Reserve System, what is that? Why does this say Federal Reserve note on my dollar, instead of, it's an actual dollar printed, actually backed by something, a receipt, a legitimate one. So, again, I encourage our ANCAPs, and I do love the fact that us liberty-minded individuals really champion this, and we're really stirring on this and bringing kind of a spotlight, to monetary policy, to currency, to those kind of ideas, which really are foreign when you go talk to other alignments.
Yeah, and it's incredible that so few people understand the magnitude of what the Federal Reserve is doing, that basically it's the biggest fraud or Ponzi scheme that the people have ever seen. And yet people use it every single day. People see that money, or I shouldn't say money. Money has to have a store of value. It's currency, and that's strictly what it is. But it's unbelievable that, you know, everyday people, they don't understand it. And I try every day to try and get that message out to people, because it's so important. Because the fact that every individual is paying off that debt, they are paying off that debt at the creation of the dollar, and now they're trying to push it into a global currency, and it's just it blows my mind that we've been able to be sucked into this for so long, since 1913. And you know, it really brings a lot of it should bring a lot of attention to the issue, considering the fact that it affects every individual. You don't have to understand economics for it to affect you, and that's what I always say. It's made boring, it's made complicated for a reason, because they don't want people looking into this stuff. It really isn't that difficult once you look into it.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to bring up this subject because it's been all over the news lately, and I have to laugh about it, because with the recent revelations of the Panama Papers, which were funded by George Soros's Open Society Foundation, people are more scared than ever to try and keep their money safe from government theft. With the deception surrounding that story, the United Nations, IMF, World Bank, and OECD have put forward a plan called Supporting the Development of More Effective Tax Systems to force all governments worldwide to keep extensive tabs on taxation. This is not only attacks a country's sovereignty, but most of all, the liberties of each individual living in each country. So what are your thoughts on the Panama Papers and the aftermath?
Oh man, I mean, when I was hearing about, you know, whether it been celebrities and whether it been all of these figures storing money elsewhere, tax havens, yada yada, you knew that it was going on, but you started getting, you know, names. And I was always like, good, you know, any kind of, I don't care who it is. I mean, I can understand the argument against politicians, because politicians are stealing from you, and then they're going to store money. That's a little kind of a different situation. But individuals who have earned their money through voluntary exchange, I would encourage them in any kind of way to put that money somewhere where it can't get taxed or stolen. Let's call it what it is, because you know, taxation is theft. You know, so that's exactly what it is. Tax evasion is theft evasion. And yeah, so I always say I encourage people, and the fact that it's so frowned upon, it just lets you know that you know, the indoctrination is worked so well. How we frown upon people that want to store their money somewhere else and don't want to get taxed and things like that. They're looked at this bad person, and I'm like, well, this person is keeping the money that they voluntarily earned, and also we understand that our government you know, gives it away in a lot of senses, in a lot of different ways, whether it be due to war and other kind of efforts that a lot of people don't even support. We know that they spend inefficiently. That's really what the entity is designed to do. And it's funny that you did mention kind of how economics is made boring and whatnot. I mean, I think that's why Keynesianism is so popular among politicians and among government officials, is because it's through all of this jargon and spinning of data, they come to these crazy conclusions and try to legitimize government. And you end up with what you have right now, which is a society full of people that really think that government is necessary, really think that government needs to play a role in all of pretty much every aspect of our life from a global perspective. So again, in that sense, it worked. It worked successfully. But we all know the government is illegitimate, and because it's illegitimate, I encourage anybody, whether it be poor or rich, if you can find a way not to get taxed, I encourage you. And yeah, I support your efforts. I mean, because you're keeping your money away from this entity that has a monopoly on violence and is illegitimate.
And we see people like Erwin Schiff, who ended up dead in jail after writing books about how to avoid taxation. And, I even would go even further than saying taxation is theft and say taxation is armed extortion, because in the end, you're under the barrel of a gun, whether or not you like it. If you try to avoid taxation, they're going to come after you with guns and try and throw you in a cage. So it certainly is kind of just coaxing people into the cage if they dare to protect their money.
Absolutely.
And I mean, yes, there are a lot of fraudsters involved in the Panama Papers, but that's not why they're bad. They're not bad people for storing their money. They're bad because they are fraudsters.
Right.
And we see all this hypocrisy coming from the U.S. government, and we know now absolutely that George Soros' Open Society Foundation did indeed fund the leak of the Panama Papers, and that's already exposed by the very guys that exposed the Panama Papers. And I mean, we know that. We know that they have been picking and choosing what to release. That's why you barely see anything from people within the U.S. government, because they want to protect their money too, but they're the ones making the rules. So they are going to say, look at these horrible people in Russia or in Iceland or whatever. And, it's absolute insanity. So now, Eric, what do you think of the Hegelian dialectic of Bernie Sanders' policy? We see leftists flocking to him like crazy, but they seem to like the idea of what he's saying more than they actually understand it or understand the idea of consent versus force, for that matter.
Oh man, Bernie Sanders highlights pretty much everything wrong with government and the dangers of government and the dangers of politics. I mean, he's going up there saying a bunch of nonsense. And to be fair, it's not just him. But like you said, I feel like he's the most attractive, definitely to people that are more closer to our age. They're flocking to him, to his ideals, even though, I mean, to me, they don't even make sense. I mean, I would think to any rational person, they don't make sense. Even when you ask him, like I believe, was it last year when he was doing an interview, and don't take my word for anything, go look it up. And they asked him, did he plan to ever have his well, they didn't ask him if he ever planned it, but he said, would you plan to actually balance the budget? And he said, no, you can't do that. And that let me know right there, like, I'm not supposed to take anything this guy says seriously on any account. But he does. He recognized that government, again, it has that. That's why it's so illegitimate, because they can do things, whether we print money through the Federal Reserve system, taxing people to death. They can do things that they can pile up debt. They can monetize their own debt. They can do things that the other individuals that don't have the fancy, costumes that the government has, they can't do what they do. And he goes around saying craziness, and it's very, very attractive, but none of it makes sense. How he's going to pay for it doesn't make sense. He doesn't even care to really explain it. And the guys that leftists, those Keynesian economists that even try to explain it don't even make sense. And they know they don't make sense, but that's the dangers of Keynesianism. That's the dangers of government in general. But it really is fascinating to see so many people that are lulled and just attracted by this, and they go around acting as if they are humanitarians. Oh, well, he cares about the poor. We're going to care about the poor. People are entitled to this, not understanding that they don't have any type of moral high ground, because everything that Bernie Sanders is advocating for or advocating on behalf of is expanding government. It's going to expand government. Therefore, it's going to expand use of force. You just said not too long ago, I mean, pretty much everything that the government does is under the threat of a government gun. And so as long as you not necessarily disagree, but so as long as you disobey and you go against the wishes of those of the government, they will, again, use force. They will initiate force. And if you resist, we saw what happened to Eric Gardner. I mean, yeah, you can very well get killed. Like, this is for real. So, they don't have any type of moral high ground by advocating for more extortion, more coercion on peaceful, consenting individuals. So I don't buy their bogusness when they go to, I guess, claim that they're somehow humanitarians and they care about the poor. They care about, so no, they just want to extort people.
Yeah. And if they cared about people so much, they'd leave them alone and stop forcing them into cages if they want to protect their money. And I mean, that's why I bring up the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, and repeat, because we see all these politicians on the more left side of things, and also on the right side, you know, the more social conservatives, trying to blame the big corporations and not blaming the government from allowing those big corporations to become monopolized at the hand of government. And I mean, we see the same thing in the healthcare system. They want to, for example, they want to make medicine cheaper for everyone out there so that, you know, they get better medical care. But then they tax us, put that money into that company, and then they drive up the prices and they inflate the prices, and then it makes it more expensive. So then they say, okay, well, maybe this time it'll work. And it just seems over and over again. Same with these big corporations, corporations like Monsanto. The government basically created that monopoly in the first place back in the 60s. And we have to look at things more from, we have to follow the money and follow the ruler, because, I mean, in the end, we look at all these politicians, and they're mostly puppets to not necessarily multinational corporations as much as it is to central bank control, which has that pulls the puppet strings of basically every facet of society. And now I wanted to ask you about this. What do you think Obama's legacy will be? Because it's hard to even really start in that regard, because we've seen so much insane stuff happen under Obama, from the National Defense Authorization Act to endless bombing of countries around the Middle East. What do you think his legacy will be?
Well, it depends on who he asks. That's really what it depends on, because if you ask those leftists, I mean, I'm already seeing it. You know, I mean, people posting these crazy Occupy Democrats memes. That's the poison. That's the cancer of the internet. But they post all these crazy, like they really think that this is like the best president ever. So if you ask those guys on the left, they're going to say that he was the best. He was the greatest president ever, definitely because he passed Obamacare, and he put all these people under the illusion that he was ending war efforts, and it's all bogus. But if you ask somebody that actually knows what the hell is going on, they're going to be like, well, no, that doesn't make any kind of sense. He's bombed more countries than Bush, you know, and yeah. So when I look at him as probably the biggest, at least in my eyes and in my generation, obviously, but the biggest con artist, because he lied. I mean, across the board, he lied about stopping said war efforts. When he wanted to go past Obamacare, he went and championed and campaigned talking about it wasn't a tax. Supreme Court act said really the only reason that we're going to pass it is because it's got to be a tax. Said you can keep this plan, keep that plan, keep that doctor. It was all a lie. You know, now again, for not having it, you got healthy young adults like myself who don't want it, haven't been to the doctor in forever, don't even want health care, but are forced to have to pay a certain percentage, or whichever one is higher, a certain percentage of your income in order to you basically fund it. I forgot what they put it under, some stupid name that angers me every time I hear it, but it's like basically saying you're obligated to put money into this pot. Just simply because you exist, even though you don't want health care. So he's a liar. He's a compulsive liar, and I always remember him as a warmonger, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's that old Soviet mentality of for the greater good of the greater number, absolute collectivism. And I mean, G. Edward Griffin, who wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island, has made that point many times, that this is literally all about collectivism. It isn't about left or right. It's about the state believing that they can control every individual for the greater good of the greater number. And because one person has what they think is a good idea, which in my opinion isn't, but for them it's a great idea, so it needs to be forced. And I always say good ideas don't need to be forced, and Obamacare is an extreme example of that too, because if you look at Canada, people are moving or traveling to Europe and places like Hungary and around that region for medical care, because it's completely jacked up the prices. It's made going to hospitals incredulously difficult to ever actually get service. And it's made the competition in the markets absolutely non-existent. Yep. There's no competition anymore. So there's no reason to compete prices and put the prices down, because they can just make one price for something and put it up to a high standard and make people have to pay until they're in absolute debt. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that comes back to the whole idea, the notion of debt enslavement, from the Federal Reserve to the markets to medical care. It all comes together. Now, it blows my mind that people could support Hillary Clinton, considering the disgusting things that she's been involved in over the years. We don't have to go into all of that because, well, I mean, it speaks for itself. 45 years of, in my opinion, absolute terrorism. Yeah. But then there's Donald Trump, which I can understand why people like Donald, but he's certainly no champion for liberty. And we, the individual, are the champion we're waiting for. When it comes to elections, it's just the left-right paradigm over and over again. Different puppets, same master in the end. So what are your thoughts on the left-right paradigm and the forgetfulness of the American public one election after another?
Well, I mean, it really, when I start, I feel like every year, well, not every year, but every 4 years, we come around and we start having these conversations about elections and who's going to help out this said demographic, and it's all nonsense. It creates this same kind of cycle of bogus bull crap. So you always, I feel like each 4 years we get this. It's demagoguery. That's what it is. But we get these individuals who say, "I'm going to help this groups of these type of groups of people, and I'm going to help them," and it never happens. And I wish people just and it's funny because a lot of these guys' voting habits never change. But what I know with the whole you know, whether it be under a Republican ticket or under the Democrat ticket, it's always kind of I mean, well, I'll take for example. The last, 3 election cycles, you had a more liberty-oriented, I guess, minded individual that was running under the ticket, under either the Democrat or the Republican ticket, and they were basically, you saw the blatant efforts to keep them out of the way, and it just trips me out how people just don't want to own themselves. I mean, that's what I get from it when I start seeing these people, you know, whether it be Donald Trump, he's saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I'm like, all right, well, how about this? How about you put the power back in the hands of the individual and you let them decide for themselves, or from a cooperative standpoint, from a voluntary standpoint, and you let them choose exactly what route they want to go, because each, you know, and it is just limited to the presidency. We talk about the people in Congress. It's the same idea. It's all about passing new legislation, new taxation, and for false promises that will supposedly, I guess, advance lift people's standards of living. And it has never worked like that. No matter what aspect of history you look at, it has never, ever worked like that. Nobody has ever fulfilled these promises. And you see, I feel like by the 3rd year, or depending on how many, I guess, times they get elected, whether it be 4 to 8 years, you start seeing, I guess, people who start being like, well, government sucks, government sucks, government sucks. Yeah. And then that 4th year and that 8th year come around, and then you got a new wave of puppets coming along, and then it's like, oh, well, he's gonna save us, and it's like, all right, you realize government sucks after 3 years, after 7 years, you realize they suck. How about we start if you're going to participate in the political process, at the very least, I would think you want to elect somebody that's going to put the power back into your hands, and they understand. That's why it was so fascinating to me about Ron Paul, because he admits that I'm not a ruler. I'm not even fit to rule over you. I'm not fit to rule. That's the most honest politician to me, is that the person that's going to come along and say, I'm not fit to rule you. So what I'm going to do is, I'm abolish laws, I'm going to abolish departments, and I'm going to, abolish taxes, and I'm going to give the money back to you, and I'm going to let you rule over yourself, because honestly, you are the person that's the most fit to rule over yourself, as opposed to what we have now is new people that are going to say, I am going to use this government monopoly on violence to lift everybody out of poverty, and I'm going to lift everybody's standards of living, and it has never, ever, ever worked like that.
No, and Ron Paul is probably the only politician I've ever been able to support because in 2008 I was 14 years old, and when I was reading Marxist books, I was a socialist. From the age of 12 on, I was like, let's check out this book, and it's Marx, some book by Marx or something. And when I saw Ron Paul at the age of 14 running for president back in around 2007, it was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen. It blew my mind away. It's a politician not asking to get power, but asking to be able to, stop the walls between the people and the government and allow the people to be free. And it's funny when you talk to a lot of socialists, you ask them, hey, if you had a voluntary society, wouldn't you just be willing to voluntarily pay those taxes? Can't you just voluntarily pay taxes? And they say, well, no, I probably wouldn't do that. And it's like, well, there you go. Then, so you're saying you need to be forced. You don't even want to pay that, but you are being forced to, and that's the right thing to do. And it comes back to something I've been saying a lot over the last few years, which is the message of liberty is basically that of you only have control over one person in life, and that is yourself. And without that, what's the point of life in general? If you can't control yourself, what is the point? And I wanted to get to one question about more foreign policy because not that long ago, G. Edward Griffin actually told us here at WHAM that the only justification for coercion is in the defense of life, liberty, and property. And now I wanted to ask, now Obama's administration has largely been behind arming and funding ISIS alongside the CIA, all while dropping bombs on villages, killing men, women, and children, and angering locals. So from an anarcho-capitalist perspective, how do we tackle the issue of ISIS without continuing to be the policeman of the world and creating more problems?
I'm so glad you asked me that question because I find that AnCaps, and this is me criticizing my fellow AnCaps, they kind of dodge those kinds of questions because my thing is that at the end of the day, no matter whether we like it or not, we know how they were created. At the end of the day, you have this crap fest of ISIS who are, killing innocents. And it's not just ISIS. You got like Boko Haram doing it in Africa to a great extent. So my thing is like you have to you got to kind of because what we do now, our foreign policy just keeps endorsing this and keeps kind of I guess funneling the fire, whereas it keeps growing and growing and growing and new terrorist groups here and there. So you got to stop that. This whole we're gonna this nation building and all of this. We have to stop with all of that. We got to quit funding rebels who inevitably turn into people that want to shoot innocents in the face. We got to stop that kind of attitude. But my thing is, and I feel like I've seen the AnCaps go left and right on this, not necessarily in terms of the political spectrum, but just to say that they go opposite ways. But in my honest opinion, I think that the biggest focus has to be with letting citizens arm themselves here, because you got to understand why they're able to get away with all of this. The reason why I guess the American government, and not just the American government, you got other United Nations that are kind of participating in I mean, we can call it what it is. I mean, really, it's not a whole lot that separates them from ISIS in a lot of sense.
Sometimes they are ISIS.
Well, yeah, but my thing is, you have to. The reason why they're able to get away with that is because it's under the guise of, all right, we are protecting the American people. That's how we're protecting the people of our country, because if these people get over here, they're going to expand and they're going to come infiltrate, America, or infiltrate this country, and they're going to bomb these people. And my thing is like, all right, let's assume that that's going to be the case. What you're doing right now isn't stopping. This is why I try to, and I guess I've had the most success in converting those neocons, in which, all right, you kind of understand it, because they understand it in a sense like, all right, well, we got to protect ourselves. That's why they're so pro Second Amendment and other things like that. So they kind of understand the idea, but they just start bootlicking really is what it is when we start talking about military and things like that. So why they are so fond of military, because they think they're giving them this sense of security is what it is. I mean, which is admirable. That's admirable if that was what they were doing. Anything, people securing people, I find that admirable, because you're putting your life on the line to protect other people. That is admirable to me. But you got to understand that's not necessarily what our military is doing. So I think it starts back at home. Obviously, you want to stop what you're doing over there, but I think it starts back at home. If the idea is to really protect the American people, you got to allow them to protect themselves. And that's where the Democrats, more so the leftists, are winning, because they're so pro-gun control, in which I guess they really allow said military expansion to take place, because it's like, all right, well, you can't really. I mean, we've made it harder, significantly harder for you to protect yourselves. So you got to depend on us, and if you got to depend on us, you got to kind of deal with us bombing innocent men, women, and children overseas. So it's a hard subject to tackle, but I honestly think it really starts at home. If the idea is that you're protecting people, then why don't you allow them to protect themselves?
Yeah, all you have to do is basically look at Chicago and see why gun control is obviously. If you're not gonna buy it, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but I think that's the perfect example. I'm one of those guys that I'm always talking about, like, not always, but I tend to sometimes talk about, race and a lot of these African American communities in which is, it's war grounds in a sense. People airing each other out, but they are so like heavy on gun control, and it's like the most blatant example of, all right, this isn't working. This is not working. The people that want to protect themselves from these type of individuals, these guys that are actual criminals, because there's actual victims, innocent victims at that you make it significantly harder for them to protect themselves.
Well, isn't it always funny how liberals will often say, well, the prohibition of marijuana is only making it worse, but guns, those need to be banned, because that will make
right out
things
the
worse.
window. Logic goes, and that's the example I use. I mean, it's like that with guns. I mean, they say that, all right, well, like they like to think they understand the war on drugs. And they say, well, it's creating these and I'm all kind of for black and gray markets, but I understand what they're saying when they say black markets in terms of the banning of drugs. Has created these black markets, and what they mean by that, they're talking about like drug cartels and things like that, which is creating these dangerous scenarios. But they understand that, or they like to think they understand that, but the logic just goes out the window when you start talking about other things like guns. You start talking about guns. It's like, all right, well, don't you think if you ban that, it won't be another type of, a dangerous black market in which people will get killed, innocents will get killed, just so people can get these said guns. But this type of logic just goes directly out the window, and I don't.
No, and I like how you kind of strung together the right to self-defense with what's happening with ISIS and everything, because isn't it always interesting how the United States will be the policeman of the world? They'll go over there, they will create thousands of enemies, or millions, I should say, massacring innocent people. Then they arm and fund these rebel groups that emanate themselves as ISIS, and then they take away the defense of the good people within the United States of America, and then they draw a big red target and say, come on over here. And it's the logic is there isn't any. It's not even worth. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you something quickly because we are going to wrap it up soon. But I wanted to ask, because you are an African American man, I think you would have a different perspective on this issue than a lot of people. And I wanted to ask, what do you think of this culture of political correctness that's stopping the individual from analyzing reality at the risk of being seen as some form of bigot, like the refugee crisis, for example?
That's. Say what you want about a lot of libertarians, who I guess like the main one maybe being Stefan Molyneux. I really had to hear him say it to where I'm not saying I'm the biggest fan of him, but what I'm saying is he broke it down where he was saying like the regressive left. If you're going to talk about different political ideologies, the regressive left is the most dangerous, because they're simultaneously trying to, they're doing the nonsense in which they're expanding the government. But they're also trying to silence the people that disagree with everything that they say by trying to end the conversation by just saying you're a bigot. And it's so stupid, and that I hear people say, like, when you talk about the refugee crisis, and I think some of the libertarians took the right approach. And my thing is like, all right, granted, yes, you want to call it a crisis and whatnot, but you got to understand in a lot of cases, this is theft by way of the American people, because they do have all access to a lot of different programs, not just funding the necessary screening to get here. Obviously, they're funding all of that, but they're in all these different kind of, I don't know, you can't really call them camps, but they're in all these different financial situations, and they have access to from day one, since they got here, before they ever worked at all, before they had money to even be taxed, they have access to all of these kind of different programs and things. A lot of libertarians were like, well, wait a minute, that's not right. You know what I mean? The minute we said that, they were saying, like, because my approach was like, all right, if you want to voluntarily bring, so you want to, like, I guess, sponsor a refugee, by all means, I'm all for it. But if you're talking about at the expense of the American people through this said extortion, you're going to pay for this, I disagree with that. And the minute you say stuff like that, you're Islamophobic, you're a bigot, you're all of these different names in which they more so, I think what it is they're trying not to have that difficult conversation, to try to have conversations about the reality of the situation. And I see people say this on the left, they do this with blacks all the time. If you disagree with what Black Lives Matter or these crazy organizations in which they don't even know their own end game. When you start hearing some of the things that they say, or rather what people say that disagree with them, you're automatically deemed as a racist. And all this is just a deflection tactic to not have the difficult conversations and the reality of the conversations, or have honest to God, conversations. Just have, all right, we're going to get to an actual solution. We have to at least be honest with the variables that are intact. And what happens with the regressive left is that they just try to deflect, in which they call you a name and try to actually silence you, and so to speak. And that's why I have to agree with guys like Malcolm, in which they say, in terms of, if you're talking about different political alignments, I would say the regressive left is the most dangerous.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point there with Black Lives Matter. I mean, I had a whole campaign against me a while back ago, because basically what I said was what happened in Ferguson, burning down innocent people's businesses, who happened to, actually the owners happened to be African American themselves, for their businesses, their private property to be burnt down because what some of these statist police have done. It just doesn't make any logical sense, and we know that Black Lives Matter and all the so many of these protests and organizations are actually funded by George Soros, the same guy who's funding the Nazis in the Ukraine.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely, no. That's the perfect way to put it, and this is what I was trying to make other African Americans understand. It's like, what you're doing, you're going to terrorize your own town because you're angry with what a cop did. But my thing is, and this is why I don't take them seriously, is because these same guys are going to turn around and come November, they're going to vote for the expansion of government. And I mean, 90+%, it's not even going to be close. 90% plus of African Americans that go vote Democrat, and they openly want to expand government. It's like, these are the same guys that are running their cities, in which these hardcore, and they're seeing the what happens when you expand government. That's what big government is. When you get in your butt whooped by the government, and it's illegitimate, and they get away with it. Yeah, that's big government for you, but they don't seem to take that into consideration, and that's the main reason why I don't take them serious. Because I mean, you look at, and I wrote an article on being libertarian about how if African Americans just understood the basic history, if you considered history, all of them would be libertarian. It would make sense. Because, I mean, from day one, when you had the slave, they got here fresh off the boat, and Virginia was enacting the slave codes. So they were they were utilizing the government to kind of orchestrate the society in which they were treating blacks differently than what they were treating their white counterparts. And from black codes to Jim Crow law, Supreme Court cases like Plessy versus Ferguson and Dred Scott v. Sanford, and all of these, it was just government. Even now, they try to recognize, at least somewhat, that government is causing a lot of problems. But again, they don't understand. That's why I say they don't understand, or they don't even know their own end game, because they're gonna cry and bicker about said police. But come election time, they're gonna vote I mean, it's not even going to be close. They're going to vote for expansion of government. So this is why, honestly, until they change their voting habits, I feel no reason to take them serious.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I say to all the collectivist globalist scum out there, welcome to the new generation of anarcho-capitalism, because it's growing, and it's growing big. We might have a lot of deterrents, we might have a lot of defectors, we might have a lot of people that adamantly disagree with us and go full circle towards anarcho-communism. But the fact is, we are growing in number, and we're not just, no offense to Murray Rothbard, who I have incredible respect for, but we're not the old school Murray Rothbard guys anymore. We are coming out of our shells, and we are getting out there and putting it into the mainstream, because it's really amazing how much it's grown over the last few years. Yep. Just to give a bit of hope out there to you watching. Now, Eric, where can people go to find you, and what can people do to support the work you do?
Well, I'm everywhere. Eric D. July is going to be my handle pretty much on everything. That's my public Facebook. Well, my public Facebook is Eric July Texas, which is just TX, or ERICJULY TX. That's the Facebook. Twitter is Eric D. July. If you want to support me in terms of just me as an individual, I recently popped off a Patreon in which that handle is going to be /Eric D. July as well. If you want to donate monthly to all the content that I put out, whether it be the vlogs and you got subjects and stuff, I have rewards and all of that stuff, you can go look up at the Patreon. And you can support what I do. I'm really trying to be that vehicle for spreading anarcho-capitalism and spreading libertarianism. So in whatever way you want to support me, you can do that, as well as supporting my band, because we're AnCaps as well. We promote that in our music. Our latest music video, Statism. You see me rocking the black and gold, you know what it is. So if you can support BackWordz, it'll have the same effect. So I'm not hard to find. I'm everywhere, and I appreciate everybody out there that supports me. And again, Josh, I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome, Eric. You are an awesome individual, and it's so refreshing to see. And one more thing, where can we find an AnCap hoodie like the one you had in your music video? Because that was awesome.
All right, it's going to be anarchyball.com. You'll be able to get those. We kind of have those on back order. My colleagues that actually make the hoodie, they recently had a son, bless their heart, pass away, and so they're kind of on back order. We will pick those back up, but please give them time to agree. But you can go to anarchyball.com, I believe it is, and you'll be able to order the same exact hoodie that I had on in the actual Statism video.
An incredible business, and you're an incredible guy, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure we will talk again.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.